Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are joined by Mark Alabakov, who is calling in all the way from just outside of Melbourne, Australia. He will tell us where. And he is a professional basketball coach in the Australian leagues. And, Coach, I'm super excited to have you here. Thanks for taking the time to call in.
Appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, it's exciting to be able to jump on the pod and share some of the things that I've learned from working alongside some great coaches, and one's better than me.
Yeah, isn't that always the most important part? Surround yourself with people smarter than us. That's why I'm talking to you. Coach, do me a favor, take us through your background. How'd you get into coaching? How'd you get into basketball? What are some of the other things you did in your childhood as it led up to this moment where we are now?
Yeah, I'll start at the origin. I think my family was always a sporting family. My dad played AFL football, not in the pro leagues, but just locally, and transitioned to basketball soon after I was born. So I only ever got to watch dad play local basketball, and I got bit with the bug that then made me fall in love with the sport. So I wanted to follow in dad's footsteps and began playing as a young junior athlete. Went through the domestic competition here in Australia, progressed through to representative level club basketball. Never was at a level where I could make state teams or the high end of elite competition, but managed to salvage progress to rather 5 years in our state competition, which is called the Big V League, I like to table it as a nondescript backup point guard on a team. So I managed to hang on for 5 years, but it was kind of concurrent, the understanding that I wasn't going to make it a higher level as a player, with me diving into a little bit of coaching locally. I have a younger sister, and just by chance got a call up. Their regular head coach for her domestic basketball team wasn't available. They asked me if I could stand in for this one particular week, and I said yes. That parlayed into, can you do the next 2 weeks because the coach is absent? Then it became, can you see out the season? Do you want to coach ongoing? Those humble beginnings almost went in I guess, follow the same path as what I did as a player. I progressed to coaching representative level, but I had far more, I think, to give in the coaching space, and turned all of my energy into trying to get as good as I can in that space and as knowledgeable as possible. So I coached representative. I joined elite player pathways with Basketball Victoria, where I got to work closely with a number of elite coaches that were coaching either state teams, junior national teams for Australia, were coaching in the NBL, the Men's National League, or the WNBL, the Women's National League that we have over here, and managed to be around some great people and sit under the learning tree of them and grow my own capacity. So working with state teams then got me an opportunity to be a coach within the WNBL, and I was an assistant coach with the Townsville Fire. I started in 2012, so I moved out of the state of Victoria, moved up there, spent 2 seasons with them working under Coach Chris Lucas, who's one of 3 coaches that I've been able to work with that are the winningest in the history of the WNBL. Did 2 seasons there, and then got to work with Guy Malloy in Melbourne. So I moved back to my home state, worked with him in 2 areas, actually, not only with his club team, the Melbourne Boomers at the time, but he ran, it was like a prep academy called the Australian College of Sport. So while we don't have, I guess, the equivalent to the States in a college sport environment, this was meant to mimic that with a tertiary level diploma attached to being a semi-pro sports person, or having the preparation that it would take, and then being able to parlay that into college offers, pro opportunities thereafter. From there, one of the assistants that I worked with, her name is Cheryl Chambers. So we're both assistants under Guy Malloy. She got the head coaching position in Sydney with the Sydney Uni Flames at the time. Asked me to go be her lead assistant coach. So that prompted a move up to Sydney. Spent a couple of seasons there, interviewed for the vacant head coaching job when Cheryl decided to move home to be closer to her family. Was in the final 2 of that equation and unfortunately missed out. And then that brought about an opportunity to move to Bendigo, where I still am today in terms of where I live, with a team called the Bendigo Spirit. I got to be their lead assistant coach for 3 seasons, and that finished in 2022 when the coach that we had moved on. Interviewed for that position and was in another final 2 and missed out on that occasion as well. So that was probably the main journey in terms of the pros. Now, what that afforded me the opportunity to do was work under, as mentioned, the 3 winningest coaches, WNBL level, and sit under the learning tree of those great minds. But each had a different trait that made them unique and made them successful. And what I wanted to do in my role as the assistant and working for them, find ways that I could authentically bring out of myself what made them successful. To be able to steal from the rich and give to the poor, so to speak. So that helps to develop a lot of my framework of coaching. And I delved into coaching as a head coach in the used to be the SEABL, the Southeast Australian Basketball League. It's since been rebranded the NBL One competition, but it's the second tier league. If I had to give an example for American listeners, it's essentially the G League to the NBA. So I've been head coaching in that competition for 7 seasons, and the seasons run opposite one another. So they're not at the same time. So I had the ability to, while I was assisting in the National League, then go and apply my trade and try out some of the things that I was learning or had learned through my developmental stages as a head coach in the NBL One competition. So I've had 7 seasons there, been able to go to 2 NBL One South Conference Grand Finals. I've won one of them, been to 2 NBL One National Finals and won one of those as well. The culmination, or the most valuable of all of those, was in 2023. So that season, I won the Coach of the Year award. We had an undefeated NBL One South Conference season and Nationals campaign. We had our youth league, so our underpinning under 23 competition, win their championship. And then there's a country basketball league that plays through this regional area. After all of those seasons, we were able to win the championship in that as well. So had a historic season in basketball nationally, but certainly for the region here, and have 4 championship rings essentially in a short period of time, but then allowed those athletes to be able to present the best version of themselves. What else can I tell you? One of the things that I'm passionate about and is a point of difference is the skill development space. And I think a lot of my background through working with Basketball Victoria was rooted in that space, in being able to be resourceful with what you have in spite of potentially a lack of resources. Can you try to be competent and effective at the job of coaching, even when you don't have the biggest budget, the biggest and best athletes, etc.? But that's been something that I've self-researched for a long time, formally researched. I've got a degree in exercise and sports science from Deakin University, and been able to combine, I guess, all of that knowledge and that experience to, in the past 6, nearly 7 years now, working with either lapsed or emerging Australian national team players for the Australian Opals in the women's game, or the Gangaroos, so the 3x3 team. I've taken athletes who are emerging in those spaces and then been able to work closely with them over the course of a season when they've played for my team at NBL One level. We're talking 4 and 5 days a week on the floor, skill development, closing gaps, strengthening strengths, video analysis, you name it, any way that we can optimize performance, and been lucky enough to be successful in all instances in having those athletes then be selected to represent Australia directly after a 6-month period of working together with me. So it's something I'm very proud of. Being able to mesh, I guess, the sometimes competing goals of team success with individual aspiration. That's a long-winded answer to a lot of it. I think one of the things that's worth adding as well is I've always tried to balance both the art and the science of coaching. So while I've got the degree in exercise and sports science, I've then gone to seek other methods of getting better. So I've been a graduate of the AFL, the Australian Football League. The AFL Coaches Association has a Next Coach program, which is I believe it's a 14-week intensive training program, all centered around the art of coaching and how to coach people, how learners learn. While it has a base in football, it's more about the profession and everything that goes into it. So I've graduated that. I was one of 12 coaches to graduate from that course in 2022. And then this year graduated as part of the 5th generation of the EuroLeague Head Coaches Academy, one of 50 coaches globally to be able to do that as well. So I'm always looking inward, especially I mentioned earlier, one of my failures as a coach, failing to reach the goal of head coaching at WNBL level up until this point. Rather than being bitter, I've always tried to be better and try to be as undeniable a candidate when the next opportunity comes.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I got front and back notes here. So we're going to dive into some of this stuff here. And I'm not going to stick with the traditional script here because I have a lot more of some interesting things. Number one, grounding. For those of you that haven't heard one of the episodes with my Aussie brethren, basketball in Australia is not rooted in the schools the way it is in the States. It is club-based stuff. And when he was talking about representative level, That would be kind of like the city or the metropolitan area. State level would be like the state of California if we just had one team by age group. And then national level is obviously like the national team. So giving that to everybody that's listening so you know what he's talking about. I am curious, you mentioned the Big V League. And when we were there this summer with our teams, while we were waiting for our turn to play the 18U or the 16U team, there was like a 23U team going on. Is that what you're referencing? Talk a little bit about how there are still options for adults in Australian athletics that exist beyond the US version of Adult League, which is basically like the beer league for people that are old and over the hill and just want to get a sweat in. Explain to the extent that you can for people that are unfamiliar how that works. And I ask because when we were there last summer, my cousin, who's my age at 50, was like out at a field hockey game that she was playing in. And I'm like, what are you doing? We're old. What's going on? So anyway, go ahead and give a little primer on that.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm definitely feeling old. I'm turning 41 this year, so it's the mornings are tough on my knees and my back. So I feel you. But certainly there's players of my age that are still playing in that Big V competition. So if I was to give an order of the way that the tiers are played, and this is both men and women, you'll have your National League team. So that would be akin to the NBA, WNBA, for example. There'll be, if we talked about where it stands in the status of basketball, the next tier down competition would be the NBL 1. That would be the equivalent to a G League. So that's really high level preparatory for the next level above. Often you will get athletes that will use that as a springboard to then make a national league or will come back from a national league down. The league this season, at least in the competition that I've been coaching in the South Conference, has had former WNBA players in it and a number of Australian Opals. So it's a high quality competition. Tearing down from that is the Big V League. So that's the straight up state league. That'll have a championship men and championship women's division. So this will be open age, but let's say either players who've regressed down from the NBL 1, or perhaps their ceiling hasn't been to get to the NBL 1, or they're quality players, perhaps with not a lot of size. They'll play in those competitions. And then in the men's and women's competition, it then tiers down further. So there's champ women and men. Then there'll be Division 1 and Division 2 men and women. So it continues to cascade down. And this is all senior basketball where you or I could be playing if we're at a level. I mean, to use your phrase, a glorified beer league, some of the conferences or some of the teams, it may appear that way, but for the bulk of them, they take it pretty serious. And then tiering below that again is the U23. So that's referred to as the youth league. And within that tier of, I mean, if we call that emerging or junior competition, still just given the age, there's a championship men's and women's tier. There's Youth League 1, 2, and 3 divisionally in that U23 competition as well. And then the only thing that's below that is then your, what we would refer to as your adult domestic competition. So that would be equivalent to playing locally at your rec center in an organized competition.
Okay. And then to clarify, NBL 1, WNBL 1 are the first time people are getting paid. Other than that, people are just playing to try to like figure out how to get there.
For the most part, but there is some situations in the Big V where it's becoming an arms race. There's a little bit of money, but obviously the figures that people get paid skyrocket as you go up the food chain.
Got it. Okay. And then you also mentioned elite player pathways. Give me the kindergarten version of that so I can understand what that was referencing.
Yeah, so that at the moment, it's changed its acronym a number of times. When I worked in it, it was called the NITP, the National Intensive Training Program. Now it gets referred to as the SPP, the State Performance Program, or the NPP, the National Performance Program. So it's where each of the states will do a cattle call of all of the elite level athletes within age groups, often from under 16 up, so 16s and 18s primarily, both boys and girls, and they'll ship them all off to a series of camps where they get evaluated. They'll be nominated by their local club coaching directors, and then they'll get evaluated by staff of Basketball Victoria for the potential to play at Australian level at some time in the future. So they'll look for, it might be genetic markers if you've got some size, some athleticism, and elite speed to whatever it may be, or it could be a high IQ. They'll identify those athletes and then put them in an ongoing program whereby the sharper, more elite coaches within the state will work with those athletes on general ideas or concepts. So it might be skill development, it might be just conceptual understanding of how to play in actions or play in space, but pieces that can fit into any offense that they'll run at club level, or if they were to go on to play at a US college or play in the pros, etc. So it's an ongoing prep academy, so to speak.
Got it. Now that would be the state version of the AIS where they're at in Canberra.
Correct.
And what's the partner version of the NBA Academy or something like that? There's the AIS, and then there's the one that goes along with that.
Yeah, so the Global Academy, I believe that's finished now, but that ran concurrently at the Australian Institute of Sport with the Basketball Australia Centre of Excellence.
Yep.
The Centre of Excellence is like the best of this elite player pathway. If you excel within your state, you can get an offer to go and train in a daily environment there where it's all immersive. I think there's only a handful of places globally that have that type of sports-based facility that's there to optimize the athlete and get them to an Olympics.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because having been to Canberra to go to the Center of Excellence and check that out, and then I've been to the Western Australia Institute of Sport as well, but now wrapping it all together where it's like kind of the state version that launches you to that, it makes a whole lot more sense. Okay, let's do this, Coach. So you spent 2 years in Townville, which is up north, right? Not quite to Cairns, a couple hours away from there, but like, how does it? I don't want to call it a town, but it's not like that is as big of an area as where you're at in Melbourne, right? Or Sydney. It's like, how does a town that size support a NBL one team, or is it a full NBL team up there?
Well, it was a women's national league team, so the WNBL. So when I
WNBL.
moved up there, yeah.
And the question is obviously like, how do they support a team when it's a smaller environment? And God, just the travel, given the number of those teams, what's that? And how do you navigate that in addition to the coaching piece, which we'll get to next? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, I think to speak to Townsville when I was there, so I believe the population of the city was 160 or 180,000 people. So it wasn't many, but it was able to support at that point in time 4 teams that played in National League competition. So they had a women's National League team. So that was the Townsville Fire, who I was coaching with. There was a men's National League team, the Townsville Crocodiles at that point in time, which is now defunct. There was the North Queensland Fury, which was a pro soccer team. And then the North Queensland Cowboys, which is their pro rugby team, which is the heart and soul of the city. And I remember it, I was there for 2 and a bit years, but I remember a local suggesting to me that you only lived in Townsville if you were born there. They have a big army barrack, so if you were in the military or if you were involved in pro sport.
That makes sense. Okay, so that was that. So now you mentioned a couple people you got to coach under. You had a long history of your, let's call it apprenticeship. And then you finally didn't come in second. You got your chance to lead a team. And I'm always curious, after all of that training and prep work, we're never really ready. But what did you realize right away that you needed to figure out when you moved over 18 inches into the decision-making chair? What are some things that still sit with you that was like, I had no idea how to figure out this piece?
Yeah, it's always interesting, right? And I think I'll give a very broad answer. I think the main takeaway is probably 2 things, and I'll speak further to them. One would be the conviction of your ideas. And being able to be confident in, Australian phrasing would be to back yourself, right? To believe in your ability to do this, have some confidence behind, purpose behind your words and the decisions that you make. I think you go into these situations where you move up a step or across 18 inches on a seat, and you can often feel an imposter syndrome where the reality is, if you tally it up, like you've got everything that you need, you just need the reps and the trial and error of learn and the ability to build one's confidence when you're able to get some wins on the board, literal wins, but figurative wins in the locker room or in your practice environment. So that conviction piece, I think, is important. That probably ties a little bit into my next one, where in those instances, so to go from being an assistant coach in the WNBL for 10 years and then head coaching at NBL 1 level, often you work with athletes that are far more experienced or have played at higher levels or achieved more in their playing careers than you have as a player or have as a coach. And that can be really intimidating. And I remember wondering what the answer was, like how or why would athlete X listen to me when like they've been to 3 Olympic games and played a million games at national league level, won a bunch of MVP awards, etc. Like, why would they listen to me cutting my teeth at this level? And I often have a knack of just picking up things that might be mentioned in passing in interviews, conversations, lectures. And I was listening to, if you recall, the Coaching You live series of lectures that Brennan Seward did. One of the really early iterations, Jeff Van Gundy spoke. And when I say really early iterations, like there was no HDMI into a laptop, like it was printed sheets on a projector. And he's speaking to the projector. That's how old I am, right? But he threw out in passing, why would a player allow you to coach them? Or what would you need for a player to allow you to coach them? And he mentioned 4 traits. He mentioned be knowledgeable. He mentioned be trustworthy, be reliable. So be where you say you're going to be and do what you say you're going to do. And then be consistent. And that's consistently the same person. If I know what to expect and I can get a comfort and a trust around who you are as a person, I think those 4 traits, or he suggested those 4 traits were the ticket to anyone allowing you to coach them if you can have a high level of those 4 things. So it's always been front of mind for me, and sometimes things that I suppose points that I'll go back to in my thinking when I'm about to work with an athlete or sometimes a coach that I might revere or have a deep respect and admiration for. I always think, am I knowledgeable? Yes. Can I display that? Am I trustworthy? Yes. How do I display that in this iteration? Reliable and consistent.
So I think you mentioned Chris Lucas and Guy Malloy, correct?
Yep.
So how would you say those 2 mentors showed up in the 4 ways you just mentioned from Stan Van Gundy? And what did you take from each of them as you tried to lean into your authentic self in the same way, right? Because you can't be them. So, like, how did they
Correct.
show up in those 4 ways, and how have you taken to trying to do that in your own way?
Yeah, I think certainly from a knowledge standpoint, both of those 2. And the third coach that I worked with really closely was Cheryl Chambers. So all 3 of those are in the top 5 of wins in WNBL level. But knowledgeable, tick across the board, like trustworthy, reliable, consistent. I would say all 3 of them were in their own way. And that's part of a cop-out answer. But to further elaborate, like what did I take from them? Chris Lucas is highly competitive. So in presenting his knowledge or his reliability, like you knew that he was always going to fight for you. And he was the type of coach that you could be down 19 with 20 seconds to go. He's calling a timeout and looking in his back pocket for a 20-point play, right? That was something that made him successful. I started to think, where within myself authentically can I bring that out so that I'm not just a carbon copy of him, but it feels real, and can I lean into that competitive aspect? So that looked like putting a time and score on everything at practice. That looked like taking like that learning of never say die. Can we play to win even if it's a practice match against a U16 boys team in the preseason? Can I show a humility, but certainly show a high level of competition, because that's the arena that we're in. For in the middle of that, Guy Malloy was a master teacher, incredible distiller of information and organizer of practice planning. And he was heavily influenced by, or took a lot of learnings from, Mike Dunlap, who was also heavily or a big influence on Brian Goorjian, our former now Australian men's coach that helped us win a bronze medal at the previous Olympics. But that brought out of me the importance of preparation, a method to be able to brain dump everything that I'm thinking, but then go through a period of drafting and distilling that information into what matters most, dissecting my practice plan to like, where have I doubled up on things that I don't need to, so that I can teach more and be able to get more output from the inputs, then be able to review. So that might be filming myself at practice, that might be miking myself up, being mindful of my communication. I think that's an ongoing challenge for myself. I can be verbose, and certainly in a long form podcast that lends itself to this. But when you're coaching athletes and you're trying to be efficient with your time, you need to be an efficient beast. And one of the things that I learned, the guy pointed me towards a book that was recommended to him from Mike Dunlap, which was Tools for Teaching by Frederick Jones. And things that I took away from that was that simplicity is brevity, is clarity, is memory. And it's something that I lean back into. And then the theory of, in managing, this is around managing a classroom, but certainly in managing your team, praise, prompt, and leave. Praise the effort of the athlete to apply themselves to whatever the point of emphasis is. Prompt with the phrasing, like the golden phrase, the next thing to do is drop it on them, and then leave, but be in the vicinity momentarily that they can ask a follow-up questions, but help to train the athlete to be responsible for their own learning and have a self-awareness around it, that you can be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage, so to speak. But furthermore to that, in then deep diving more of Mike Dunlap's material, I just immersed myself. He's a master teacher, incredible into the game of basketball. But I got to witness a clinic of his when he came to Australia. And this is, I mentioned earlier, the throwaway lines that many people would forget that for some reason just stick with me. He had presented his clinic and asked for questions and answers from the crowd. And one gentleman asked, how do you get your players to listen to you? And there was a chuckle amongst all of the coaches because it's the golden question, right? And he quietened everybody down. He said, no, this is a valid question. And he goes, I've got a great answer for you. Say things once. What do you mean by that? Say things once and at room volume. And that stuck with me. And that's been a part of how I coach. And certainly in the beginnings, when you're working with the new team or new players, say things once, room volume, condition the learning environment to be like one that's civil, where you save your voice, you're not having to repeat yourself. If you say less, there's a higher premium on the quality of what you're going to deliver. But then also there's an uncomfortableness early on when you're doing that, and being able to, almost like you're putting an athlete on a bike for the first time without its training wheels. Let the bike wobble and let them fall, but get back up, or let others within the group be able to help. So you foster some solution-oriented mindset. You foster leadership within the group. I want a line on baseline under the corner of backboard over there and one on the other side. That line has basketballs, the other one doesn't. And then just pause and sit with it. And they've got all the information they need. Sometimes they'll sit and wait because they're so akin to having their hand held through the learning process, but being able to be there as a support structure without holding their hand through the whole process and then eventually letting go. I think that's coaching, right?
No doubt. And it's funny, as soon as you brought up Dunlap, like what pops in my head is praise, prompt, leave, which is like one of his major things. I do want you to go a little deeper, if you can, on the say things once and
Mm-hmm.
how that plays out in reality, right? Because you can say something once and they didn't hear you, they weren't listening. How do you then resolve for that? Obviously, over time, they're going to be trained to listen to you, but what's the
Yes.
coaching on say things once, but there are people that missed it?
Yeah, I think it's all encompassing. So it's not the one panacea. So then it's incumbent upon you to be simple, clear, and precise. It's incumbent upon you as a coach to then create a learning environment, and that can be noise disturbances, that can be visual noise disturbances, like create an attention where the message can land. And then where you're going to have human error, we all sometimes, the phrase that we use in Australia is going off with the fairies, meaning you lose your concentration. We all have those moments, right, where we zone out. So having an awareness of that, I think, is important to just bring it to the fore without beating an athlete over the head with it, but then leaving space for organic correction and leadership to emerge within the group where other people can come in and save the day, so to speak, or if there's still nobody speaking, rather than repeat the same point, I often then ask guiding questions like, who heard the message? Oh, yeah, I did. Do you want to help everybody out? Because you're not a selfish person, but it's a selfish actor to harbor all of the information that can help people, but then sit on it yourself. I'd love for you to share that with the group so that we can all be successful, and then point to and acknowledge that leadership within your group and being able to give space for it to occur, but also foster opportunities for it to occur as well.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And it's where I want to go. And I don't know if this is an Aussie thing or if it's an international thing, but the idea that you've mentioned multiple times about being a master teacher, about purposefully and intentionally growing your knowledge of sport, knowledge of teaching, pedagogy, right? Your methodology, these other things, is not inherently an American approach to coaching. And by that, I mean, you get thrown in the fire, you figure it out, you get better a little bit, you'll go to clinics, but you're talking about a 14-week course that you said you graduated from, Art of Coaching, that was in
Yeah.
Australia. Then you did another EuroLeague Academy. Can you talk a little bit about what that situation was how can people find these type of things that maybe if they have 14 weeks and they can go to these things, but it's just like that's so far removed from the resources that we have here. I'm just super curious what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably two answers that come to mind. I think, but in both of those instances, they were delving into, in a lot of ways, the science. Because while it's around the art of coaching, the course that I did, the next coach course with the AFL Coaches Association, it was more to bring awareness and to open your mind or open your lens to be able to see more, to then be able to impact more in a way that favors you in your coaching. And that there's a lot of ways that you can spin that. But I think often coaches, I'm seeing it globally, certainly within Australia, they get fast tracked or accelerated on the science and the teaching and the small sided games and constraints led approach, cues for skill development or skill acquisition, etc. But the answer is always a blend, right? So it doesn't prepare you to then go and be an exceptional coach. And to the contrary, to the other end of the spectrum, just jumping into the fire and then not learning the science doesn't prepare you, because there's skipped steps in there. I think the answer, you would have heard many smart people talk about, the answer is always it depends, and everything slides on a scale. I think if I had to, in my experience, give a phrase to it, that I think coaching is an art based on a science. So being able to have the tools, but then get the reps and then blend what, and I suppose it's part Pandora's box for me, but I cringe when we shelve some old school methodology or what's referred to as old school, or move wholly to, let's say, modern ways of playing the sport of basketball or teaching. I think there's value in both. There's big rocks that have stood the test of time that can still be lent on. There's things that we did at a very inefficient way in the quote unquote old school that we can shelve or do in a better way. But then with modern trends, there's not the sample size that this is going to deliver the results that we want. So I think being able to grab from what science suggests is best practice, and then see that lens or amalgamate that lens with what has stood the test of time, what have I seen tangible results from. That to me is best practice. That's where I guess I go with the idea of the best coaching in my eyes being an art based on a science. Got where I was going with the second part of that question.
It's exactly
Oh,
what
where
I
do you find
figured.
it?
Yeah, it's
Where
exactly
do you
what I
find those
figured.
opportunities?
Yeah. And so
Sorry.
where was the 14-week class, like you went away to retreat, or was it like a couple hours a day on a Zoom? Like same with the Euro
Yeah.
thing. Like where do these exist? Like how do you find these things? Because
Yeah.
the idea of the science of coaching is not something you're drilling down on in the casual US coaching approach unless you're in, like you said, a kinesiology course or you're getting a degree program, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, so that's where I was going. I think coming across both of those was just through networks. So I didn't seek them out, but I became aware of them through just spreading my wings. Now I'll go back a step further. In the exercise and sports science degree that I did at Deakin University, I majored in sports coaching, and my lecturer for all 4 years was a gentleman by the name of David Parkin, who I recommend everybody go and have a look at his material. He's written a bunch of books, longtime educator, premiership winner through multiple iterations of teams in the AFL competition. But I distinctly remember him lecturing to us and saying, and this is back in, my gosh, 2000 and perhaps three, the answers that you seek to your sport and the evolution of your sport often don't lie in your sport. And the next branch to look at, or the next perhaps catchment to go and seek those answers or those points of evolution, are other sports, or other sports that are invasive. If you're playing in an invasive sport like basketball is, we invade an area, we try and score at a basket. So what can I learn from soccer? What can I learn from American football? What can I learn from field hockey, ice hockey? Being able to open our mind, and then just by being around or having conversations with coaches, going to watch sessions, you'll pick up ideas that will be, to coin another Mike Dunlap-ism, transferable truths. There'll be things that are threads across all sports, and there'll be a different way of doing things that give you a point of difference if you were to try them on and see if they fit within your own sport. And then I guess I say all of that to say, it was through immersing myself in AFL football, which I was just a fan of, but AFL football coaches, that I came across this Next Coach Academy and just applied, made it clear that I wasn't an AFL football coach. And the people that were in charge of that were very open-minded along the same lines, that the evolution of AFL football doesn't lie in football. And the gentleman that presented the course, who's another person I recommend listeners go and research, is a gentleman called David Whedon. So think of Whedon spelt like wheat, but with a D-O-N at the end, not a T. Has written a book on the art of coaching, has written a book on AFL goal kicking, and really evolved the coaching space in AFL football here within Australia.
I love that. And part of my soapbox in this world is eliminating sport specialization. So I love the fact that you are actively seeking that out and finding the transferable. And I'm actually really curious, having seen, I think, three AFL games at this point in my life, what is transferable from there, right? Because I look at basketball, I even look at field hockey, the other sports you mentioned. There's organized chaos. When you watch AFL, it's I don't even know how you would coach or teach the skills because it's just wild. So what do you find that's transferable to basketball from that?
It's interesting. So tactically, they've probably taken more from basketball than we've taken from them. So presses, zone defensive alignments, etc. Where what can we take is the importance of the play after the play, like conceptual understanding that underpins whatever your system is or your set plays or your style of play, and the value that has in burning that in, but then burning that in if we talk modern basketball, in a way that's positionless. You see in AFL football often, regardless of the type of player that you are in terms of your physical attributes, you can be played in the forward line, in defense, in what we would refer to as the back line, in the midfield. So we call it the ruck. So the ball will be thrown in the air or bounced on the ground into the air. And there's like a tip off from that instance, but then you play as a main engine room to get possession for your team and then try to create a numbers advantage to attack your side of the floor. So those have been things that I think I've learned. One of the things that stands out more broadly is the job that AFL does from a coaching standpoint, but then a club level, at making the big time where they are. So being able to make you feel important, feel seen, acknowledge you, have touch point conversations informally and have them ongoing. And I'll refer to something I learned from the Gold Coast Suns in a moment. But the feeling of culture, camaraderie, and then that you're part of something bigger. So being able to bring in players that have played for the club, coaches that have coached for the club, and having them visible and around and contributing generationally each year, it makes athletes feel like they're part of something that's the real deal wherever they are. And I think we can create those environments wherever we are at a college or a club, not forgetting our history, but leaning into it and creating the importance of what it means to don the jersey of your sporting association. Now, when I talk about the informal touch points, so the Gold Coast Suns had a coach who's since been moved on, is now an assistant coach with Brisbane, a gentleman by the name of Stuart Dew. I don't know if it's common knowledge or on the record with this, but I thought it was an ingenious and really easy idea. They set up a spreadsheet. Most AFL teams will have 40 plus athletes on it and staff members. They put everybody's name on this spreadsheet, and it was a live document, and it got circulated around whichever people were around the team most. So coaching staff, there might be, like, let's say 10 to 12 people, heads of strength and conditioning, whoever had the most visibility to the athletes most often in a week. And what they tried to do was every week they had a touch point conversation just in passing, like perhaps you're in the weight room and someone's finished their set and you go sit next to them and you have a touch point conversation as simple as like, how are you going? Like, but how are you going really? It might be from the walk of bringing the balls out from the storage room out to the field that you play on, having 2 or 3 informal conversations and check-ins with people, but then they would document that on this spreadsheet. Notable for 3 different things. They use traffic lights. Like green mean the player was in a really good headspace. Amber or yellow meant keep a watch on this person, had the option to then add notes. They've had a death in their family, or they're having a performance slump and they're really struggling with it. But some context for why we should keep an eye on them. And then red was like high alert. This person's not in a good place. Could be sporting related, could be life related, but we need to check in, provide them support if there's something that they're going through that they need some assistance with. So at any point throughout the week, prior to a training session or a game or a session in the gym, you could have a look at this document. And if there were people that didn't have touch points, you knew you had to go to see them. But then you also had a running document of how somebody was tracking. And if they had multiple weeks of perhaps not being in a great space, you could show them a bit of love for their self-efficacy or assistance where it was required as well. One of the things that they did find, which is of interest, is the people that got spoken to least or last or checked in with last were star players, because there was an intimidation or just an assumption that we don't need to check in with them. They're okay. They get the lion's share of money, status, kicks, goals, whatever it happens to be. So like that in itself is a learning tool that everybody is a human being. Like we don't coach basketball as we coach human beings that play basketball.
Correct. And one of my mentors and colleagues said, he was our math department chair for 30 years. And he said, I don't teach math, I teach people. And it's such a great reminder of the vehicle of sport or of academics that is designed to teach leadership, right? It's designed to teach you to be part of something bigger than yourself. And those are great ways to keep that front of mind. You mentioned this thing from the Gold Coast Suns, and I usually ask, what's the best thing you do programmatically to influence your culture? Do you have other examples of things like that you can offer that you're potentially looking at a new appointment? What are you going to bring with you that regardless of where you land next, we're doing this because it's this important to creating the culture that I want?
Yeah, I think there's a two-part answer. If we talk about on-court, broadly developing a self-awareness, promoting a development of a self-awareness. So if we talk about that in a basketball context where that can emerge as a byproduct, almost like a constraint, the importance of being a low rep learner. And then that ties in with say things once, be responsible for your own learning. I'm here for you, but we need to work together in this, and far better for you in your career to have a self-awareness and an intrinsic motivation rather than wait for an external stimuli to be able to drive the behavior or prompt the behavior that you're looking for. And just without, again, I use the phrase hitting them over the head with it, putting a mirror right in front of them, but being there to support them through that and offer solutions. So while you do that, and that can be really confronting sometimes for athletes, the way that you frame it and position discussions that then stem from some of the challenges that you face in those sorts of instances, you need to be an ally, not an adversary. This is me and you against the problem to try and help you get to where you want to go or present your best version. I'm not judging. This isn't a judgment. It doesn't have an end point. And I guess that kind of ties in with the popularized the growth mindset. Like, I'm not great at retaining information is finite, or I'm not great at retaining information yet. How do we help you get there? Because again, we don't have a job as coaches if we don't have players. So front of mind is always the selfless service of them. So that would be one thing. And then secondarily, I love that you asked this because this is front of mind in the process of interviewing for some jobs as we speak. But I learned this from, you might be aware of Brett Bartholomew. So he has a business and has just been a fantastic resource for, I believe, over a decade in the self-awareness of coaches and how to optimize your way of being that has nothing to do with the technical, tactical elements of your sport. In one of his courses that I did, this was an online course, actually, it's another thing that people can seek out, is, I believe he called it, or I've been calling it, connecting points. So it's a similar document, another Excel spreadsheet. We've got a stack of those happening, but it's a chance to then list all of the athletes and coaches or stakeholders that you're going to be around a lot, and then a series of things that are valuable to know about them. So they might divulge, my dog's name is X. My brother or sisters, my siblings are Jessica and Jake. And Jake plays for the University of Miami and Jessica is a stay-at-home mom. Like, you write all this down. Her favorite TV, like this athlete's favorite TV show is this, and they were talking about it. So you can then go back to these connecting points or documents as a means to relationship builds. I think one of the things that's really valuable, if we talk about superficial things when you're building a relationship with somebody new that you don't know, like use of their name. People like hearing their name. people like talking about themselves. So ask them questions and be interested, but remember things and ask them about things that they might have mentioned to you before or mentioned in a group that you retained. We use the dog analogy. My dog's name is Spot, right? Or Jess's dog's name is Spot. So she comes in to practice. She's putting her shoes on. Hey, Jess, how you going? How's your day? Yeah, fantastic. How's Spot going? And then face lights up. Like, you remembered something about me. And it's a way to, I guess, override. I know for myself, I find I have an issue with short-term memory. I find it hard to remember some things, but if I've got a document to go back to, I've got a hard copy then that can help drive my memory, burn it in, but then inorganically, I can use that information to create an organic moment or conversation that strengthens a relationship.
Yeah, no, those are both great. And specifically that last one, right? You're And even if we bring this back to the Gold Coast Suns piece, right? If you combine all three of those, now all of a sudden you're developing these relationships that are built on trust, right? That are built on what you said earlier. What are the four pieces? It's all tied into that thing that you ripped off at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. Knowledge, right? You're reliable, you're trustworthy, you're consistent, and you're building in these systems to accomplish that. So those are all really cool examples that would be good to implement. Right now, the question's like, how do you do all of that? And the follow-up I was going to ask while you were talking is my experience having been there is your approach nationally seems to be one of, all right, we train twice a week and we play these Saturday games. And so maybe you're getting 2 hours of time. Like, how do you build all this in? Like, I practice 5 days a week and we have games in the middle and all this stuff. And I don't know how I can find the time to do all that. So talk me through, how do you maximize efficiency when you have the constraints of twice a week? Maybe you get lucky and get three, and how you accomplish all that.
I think a lot of it gets done outside of hours. So it drives more towards the preparation piece. So this is part of, if you want to be a good coach, one, you obviously got to protect your time and your energy, but these things yield impact, and they yield, like, the seeds that you plant. And if you continue to water them over the course of the season, they grow into something pretty special. And the relationship piece underpins everything that you do, because it underpins that trust and reliability, consistency, etc. So I think a lot of after hours work where I make the time, I try to balance as well, just on a side tangent, protecting my own energy so that I can devote myself to the prep that goes into these and the readiness to have these micro conversations. But you're trying to then, in your practice session, famous coach educator here in Australia is Peter Lonergan. He uses the phrase more from a practical standpoint to get more, try and be efficient to get more practice out of practice, right? So when I say more practice out of practice, not only in terms of the on-court, but can I strengthen the relationships? Can I make people feel seen? Can everybody leave here feeling like they got something out of the practice session that fills their fulfillment cup, right? And then where I talk about protecting your own energy as a coach, you can't pour from an empty one. And where we're always giving, a side tangent is looking after your own energy. I'm a husband and a father as well. Being able to be those things at a high level is really important to me, and certainly balances out the time that I spend with my athletes or for the clubs and teams that I work with. Time management can be really important, and, like, good is often seen as the enemy of great, but, and I believe I got this from Tim Ferriss, done is better than perfect. And I come from a family where, like, my dad's a hard worker, has always been involved in management tiers in the corporate world, high level perfectionist. And I just see the fruits of that labor and the great things that come from it, but also how things can wear on you if you feel like you've given less than your best, or how you can delay the quality of what you're delivering if you're waiting for everything to be perfect. So I've been able to consciously disarm that within myself. Not that I don't aim to be perfect, but it forces you to distill down, like, what matters most. And I think it's the Pareto's principle, right? The 20-80 rule. Like, where am I going to yield the biggest outcome, or what's going to move the needle the most? Where should I spend my energy? And another example, Mark Manson, the subtle art of, we know the rest of the title. Like, where do I want to give my efforts?
No doubt. I love that. Okay, so follow up to that then, right, is some of these master teachers, as you mentioned them, take a Dunlap, hell, take yourself. You're going into these spaces and you've done so much preparation in advance and reps that you're not actively and intentionally thinking about a lot of these prompts and a lot of these ways you're approaching it anymore. So, how do you observe some of these elite people and glean some of this stuff that they're doing at a really high level, knowing that like they're not even thinking about it anymore? Whereas you've got to plan it in to do, okay, I need to say this at this point. So, like, how have you found your own balance and niche in that so that you can be authentic, but without sacrificing so much of the stuff that you've poured into learning? Talk a little bit about that piece because it can be stressful and overwhelming where, me 25 years in, I have a certain way of doing things. Somebody observes that and it's like, how do you get that done? And it's, I don't know. This is how I do it.
Yeah, and I think we all have a methodology and a way of being that's a comfort zone or security blanket to us, and it's often the one that we regress to go to if it's an efficient and effective version of the way that we present. I think in terms of, and this is probably goes towards the art and science conversation that I was saying earlier, and why I believe coaching is an art based on the science. Like the science to me is the routine and the detail and practice flow and where everything should be. But then the art is, are you aware of the audience in front of you? Because that's who you're delivering to. That's your customer. I think I read in the Mike Krzyzewski book, Leading with the Heart, years ago, was to have a practice plan, but not be a slave to your practice plan. So being able to call an audible mid-session, and that can be for a good reason or a bad reason. Like I don't need to spend 5 minutes on transition defense if we've nailed everything that we want to within 2.5. Let's spend some time elsewhere. Or the opposite, like things aren't landing. Do we spend more time on it? Is that going to, if I had to roll the dice on the best read in that moment, is that going to yield the results that I want? Or is it better to shelve it and come back tomorrow? And
That's the
the impact
proverbial
of,
question, isn't it? Do I keep getting reps next again, or do we move on?
right, but I think everything centers around the self like efficacy of the player, right? You can generally, people will have tells, that's body language, that's postural slumps, that's distractions elsewhere, that's muttering to themselves under their breath, having conversations with others. There's tells that things aren't going to plan. And you need to be aware of those things rather than a slave to the plan. Like I've got written here, we're doing 10 minutes of transition defense today. Like sometimes that has its place, but I think being able to be adaptable is a skill. Or here in Australia, we'll have situations in what I refer to as clubland, so club basketball. You're 20 minutes from practice starting and you'll get 4 text messages. Hey, I'm stuck in traffic. Hey, I'm really sick. I can't come today. And like all of the practice planning that you've done and this intricate practice flow, exactly out the window, right? But how can you demonstrate a resolve and an adaptability and be like water and be formless, but find the level that you need to be at with what you have? We often say, in terms of our assessment of our resources, do the best that you can with what you have where you are. But quite literally, like how creative can I be? How can I put the onus or look inward and put the onus on myself to be able to deliver one or perhaps part of an outcome that I was hoping to get out of this practice session in adapting to now the constraint is I've got 7 athletes attending instead of 12. How we might not be able to get everything done. And again, that points back to done is better than perfect. Can I give them a bit of what they need and come back tomorrow and color more detail? Any brick in the wall of development is still part of the wall.
No doubt. No, that's great. I appreciate that tremendously. And you are right at this point in the fact that you can remember little quotes because we just got Bruce Lee out of nowhere. I'm going to wrap up because we could do this for the next 3 hours. But what I always ask at the end, and clearly you spend a ton of time challenging your belief system. So this question will land well with you. But what's something you've most recently changed your mind on? And it's the idea of having growth mindset and challenging your
Yeah.
beliefs in an intentional way. So I used to believe this. And now I'm over here, and here's why. And as a husband, as a parent, it doesn't have to be basketball related. It's more just give me an example of something where like you've shifted your belief system.
Yeah. Oh, can I give you two? I'll give you an encore
You
and an
give me
encore.
17. I'm just always curious how people in the society in which we have been driven lately, especially in the States, where everything is so polarized, you're almost not allowed to change your mind anymore. And so I just want examples of people purposefully doing that.
Yeah. If we talk about on court for the longest time, so this is, if I can paraphrase or change the question just slightly to what have I opened my mind to, I've often made my bones in the past decade in being a system coach. So I've been down the line a doctor of the shuffle offense here in Australia, if we can put it like that. Got to work with some incredible minds and some of the leaders in that space through different generations and iterations of the offense. So that's been my bread and butter, but it's also been my comfort zone and perhaps as much an anchor as it's been a rocket ship strapped to my back. So it was really hard for me, not that I didn't value other ways of playing, because I certainly saw merits and I believe that anything taught well works. You just find what you believe in that you can cut with depth rather than just with breadth. But opening my mind, it was through necessity in the team that I coached this past season, where the shuffle wasn't landing for them. There was a resistance to being able to want to go down that path. And by necessity, I'm in this crossroads where, who am I here for? This is not for me if I continue down this, or this is for me if I continue down this path, but it doesn't aid them. And the selfless service of athletes is the leading principle, right? So how do I evolve, but also not throw the baby out with the bathwater? And I dipped my toe into, I've always wanted to play on live ball, turnovers or changes of possession, fast pace with transition, like 7 seconds or less, different quick hitter actions, etc., playing off kick aheads, what have you, but depending on the personnel that I've had, I've always believed in that. But defense back and set, or defense mostly set, empty everything below the nail, 4 out, 1 in, you're into your shuffle alignment and actions from there as a means to create advantage. And then it's primarily through cutting. But I had to open my mind to the group that I had worked with, and it was my first season with the club. It operated mainly out of set plays. So they would have an Iverson series of sets. They would have a staggered screen series of sets. Now, what I wanted to try to do was I was looking to try and evolve the shuffle and make a hybrid out of a 5-out alignment. That's been put on pause, but I embraced these are actions that they like. I was already going down the path of the 5-out alignment anyway. How can I meld a transition game, a series of secondary actions that then link seamlessly into an Iverson piece or a Staggers piece? And we picked 3 things. And the way that I implemented and taught it and then drilled the perception action coupling of like decision making out of the actions was all rooted in like what I had taught and learned in the shuffle offense. So it disarmed a lot of fear that I had about evolving and changing because I had cut so deep with a certain way of playing. My worry was that all of that was going to be now a sunk cost, and it absolutely wasn't. It was probably a strength to then be able to evolve and grow to become more. And I worked a job when I was 18 years old in door-to-door sales for like cable TV company. It was a job between jobs. And I don't know what it is about working sales jobs, but you work with guys that are just philosophers and they've got the answers to life because they sit on the road all the time. And I remember this conversation that we had, and we're talking about the idea of guys were wearing formal, like to formal events, salmon colored shirts. And I'm like, I couldn't wear a salmon shirt. I don't feel comfortable wearing pink. And he hit me with this line, this gentleman I was working with, and he said, but who would you be? Like, who would you be if you did? Look at it like a blanket. You can uncover more of your personality. Who would you be or become if you added this to your repertoire? And that's always stuck with me. So like that sort of ties together the on-court piece. But when we talk about off-court, what's changed my mind? I've got that perfectionism in my blood. And have made my bones and a name for myself through my work ethic and the mantra of like first in, last to leave and all of that sort of thing. But it's largely unhealthy. So what I've changed my mind on is having time blocks, having times of I'm unavailable from 8 p.m. onwards. And that's my time that I invest in my family. I'm dad and I'm husband from those points in time. But then where I spoke earlier into if I want my energy to be high and deliver the best possible service for my players and the clubs that I work with, I've got to fill my cup. Part of every single day is a form of movement. I like to go to the gym a lot. Sometimes if I got a chance to just get a walk in, or some days I'm really busy, that's 3 10-minute walks after a meal, but it's 30 minutes of activity. Something is better than nothing. And again, like with the development piece, like it's a brick in the wall, right? Any brick is a is a brick that contributes. So being able to protect my own energy, make time for myself to be fit, healthy, strong for my team, but for my family as well, and just be able to switch the world off for a period of time. It just helps me to decompress and present the best version of myself when I am on, and helps me fill my cup.
No, that's awesome. Both of those examples are great. And I think from a health and wellness standpoint, obviously, what's the cliche, right? If you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people, right? And I think that those of us that are in athletics, that are in leadership in that space, we often are just charging straight ahead with no breather. So I love that you figured that out for yourself, especially as the family is growing. That's important because time is your only non-renewable resource, and you don't get that time back. And it goes quickly for someone whose eldest child just graduated university and is off the family payroll, and I got another one that's 2 years away from graduating university. I hear you on that. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate you jumping on and taking the time. And next time when I'm out there, we definitely need to get together in person.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much for the opportunity.